What we're working on today is we're going to work on what's called completing the square, and then we're going to work on something, well, obviously, the quadratic formula. Now, I know you guys have all seen the quadratic formula in the past, and even some of you guys tried doing some factoring with the quadratic formula on the quiz. Not a big deal. I didn't say you couldn't do it, so whatever. What's going to be new, though, is what's called completing the square. From what I understand, some of you guys might have seen this in a prior algebra class. Some of you guys might have tried it. Some of you guys might not have. It is, completing the square is a very, you can basically factor any trinomial using completing the square. It has to be a degree of 2, and it is extraordinarily straightforward. So what happens is when you complete the square, you start with an equation. We're going to start with the equation x squared plus 10x minus 3. And in your head, you're probably thinking, okay, what times what is negative 3 that you can add together to get positive 10? Well, there's nothing. This is one of those cases you guys would say no solution because it's not factorable. Well, it is. And in order to factor it, you have to do something called complete the square. Completing the square allows you to get to a problem that mirrors what we did in sections 5.3 and 5.4, where you had junk squared equaled something. Whatever's in the parentheses.
It's usually 1 to the square root of 3.
So it's like x minus 2 or x plus 4, quantity squared equals some number. And then what you would do is you guys would take the square root of both sides and you would have a solution. So what we do here is we do the following steps. We're going to use this x squared plus 10x minus 3 to walk us through. Yes, sir? Again? God bless it, that kid leaves it here every flipping day.
Yeah, first it was the book.
I know, now it's full of, yeah.
And now it's
And I'm throwing it out. Not going to throw it out, but you know what I mean. I'm going to charge him for it. First thing we have to do is move the value of c. What's the value of c in this problem?
Negative 3.
Good. How do you move a negative? Good. So we're going to add 3 to both sides.
Wow.
Okay?
I do it on an average weekend.
Now, what I want you to do when you first start doing these problems is you're going to write x squared plus 10x blank equals 3. I want you to leave that blank there for right now because what we're doing is we're going to create a perfect square trinomial on that side. Okay? Now, in order to create the perfect square trinomial, you do the next step. What's half of b? Well, what's b in this case? All right, what's half? X is 10. What's half of 10? 5. So we now know what half of b is. So we take half of b. Well, 10 divided by 2 is 5. Now, square it. What's 5 squared? 25. So 5 squared is 25. So the whole idea of completing the square is you take half of b and square it. Now, if I add 25 to both sides of an equation, do I change the equation? No, because I'm adding it to both sides. If you add something to both sides of an equal sign, you maintain the balance of the equation. So by adding 25 to both sides, you get the following. You get 10x squared, or excuse me, x squared plus 10x plus 25 and plus 25 on both sides. What we have done now is yes.
Are you going to make that 28
Yeah.
Okay.
So rude.
Because now you have a perfect square. Because what times what's 25? You had to add together to get 10. 5 and 5. So you wind up with this perfect square of the quantity x plus 5 squared equals 28. This value, when you do half of b, this half of b is always the term that goes into parentheses. In this case, it was a positive 5. If this was x squared minus 10x, I would take half of negative 10. b would be negative 5. Okay. Equals 28. So now you have junk squared equals 28. How do you undo squaring? Now you square root. So now it's at a problem that you've done. What's the square root of junk squared? Junk. So I have x plus 5 is, well, square root of 28. 2 root 7. Excellent, but what did you forget?
Plus or minus.
Plus or minus. That was a lot of that. What's your last step?
Minus 5.
Good. Now we have factored something that you thought you couldn't factor. Completing the square works for everything. Yeah.
When are we gonna use that?
When I'm done grading them,
Alright, when, like, approximately
one day,
Okay, sounds like.
When do you think the grades will be in?
Yeah.
this afternoon. I'll have the grades in by the end of the day, by 2:30 or so. I plan on getting all that graded before I go home. Yeah. What I did here is this is a perfect square trinomial. What times what's 25 you add together to get 10? 5 and 5. So what happens here is every time you take half of b, that is the value for here. X plus 5 quantity squared is 28. I'm adding 25 to both sides, okay? Let me show you another one.
Hey, Mr. Murphy.
Yes, sir.
What is it? Is there like a name for it? Like, say, there's like x squared plus minus 25?
That's a difference of squares. That's a difference of squares. That's plus minus 5.
So like, would you still do the same thing like where you would want to get 0x and 0x? Like,
Yeah.
You don't have like,
In this case, I have x squared minus 16x plus 76 equals 0. If I'm going to complete the square, the first thing I have to do is move c. In this instance, if I'm going to move c, what do? I subtract it. Do you guys agree? So again, I move c right away. So I start with, I have x squared minus 16x blank equals negative 76. Once again, half of b. What's half of negative 16? Negative 8. So half of negative 16 is negative 8. What's negative 8 squared?
66.
So that's what I add to both sides. So now I have x squared minus 16x plus 64 is negative 12. So what's the trick here is, whenever you figure out what half of b is, that always is your term for the perfect square. In this case, again, half of negative 16 was negative 8. So my term became the quantity x minus 8 squared equals negative 12. So again, I have junk squared equals something. What do? We square root it. What's the square root of junk squared? Junk. So I take the square root of both sides. I get x minus 8 equals, what's the square root of negative 12?
2 root 3.
Wrong. Plus or minus. And then lastly, add 8. Yes, sir?
How did you go from x squared minus 16x plus 64, that one to the x minus 8 squared?
What x squared minus 16x plus 64, what are two numbers you multiply together get positive 64, but you add to get negative 16? It's negative 8, negative 8. What happens is every time you take half of b, that will always be that term in the parentheses. Oh, always. Yes, sir?
So technically, though, there is no true answer because there's I in there.
Correct. There's no real solution. There's no real solution.
So it's an imaginary solution.
It's an imaginary solution.
Okay.
But this still allows you to factor.
Yeah.
It factors to an imaginary solution. So your answer is 8 plus or minus 2i root 3. Okay. Did you guys notice one thing that happened with both of these problems? What was the value of a? equals positive 1. That's the only rule to completing the square, is that your a value has to equal positive 1. If it doesn't, you have to make it equal to positive 1. For example, if I look at this, 3x squared minus 6x plus 12 is 0. In order to get the value, in order to get a equal to 1, what do I have to do, Anders?
Multiply everything by 6.
How do I
divide everything by 3, guys?
divide everything by 3, because now the a value, that gives you an a value equal to 1. Leaf, what were you going to say?
Are you going to game with me?
I don't know.
Can you divide everything by before or after?
Before. I mean, you can do it after, but it's just easier to just do it right away. Yes, ma'am?
Does that have to be positive 1?
Yes. So, and that's a great question. If this was a negative 3x squared, you divide everything by negative 3. Okay? That's a great question. You always want your a value to be a positive 1. Then, if that's the case, completing the square works. And completing the square will work with every single stinking second degree trinomial that you have. So let's walk through it. Once we divide that out, we have x squared minus 2x plus 4 is 0. What's your first step?
Get rid of that C.
Get rid of that c. How do I do that? What were we going to say? Good. Subtract 4. Now your question is?
What is the
What's half of negative 2? Negative 1. So half of negative 2 is negative 1. So half of b is my term, so I know this negative 1 goes here. What's negative 1 squared?
1?
And what do I do with that?
You add it to both sides.
What's negative 4 plus 1? Negative 3. Now what do? What's the square root of negative 3? Plus or minus I root 3. Very good. And lastly, what do I do?
Plus 1.
Add the 1. Good. Not so scary, is it?
No.
Completing the square is a very easy task. It is something that you will use over and over and over and over again. It is if you were having problems factoring and you were just really upset with life, completing the square will always work. I think you might have just got lost your hand right.
Maybe.
Yeah. But the other thing that we're going to talk about today is quadratic formula. And you guys know that, right?
Which one? Is that the one where it's like 4
Something like that, yes. Sure.
Just like, why do you make a positive 1?
Because whenever you square it, it comes positive.
Oh,
Because
square.
when you square it, you're always going to get a positive value for that third c value. Okay. Remember the song?
Yes.
No, let's
Stabs
do it.
the
No, not that one. That's the evil song. Let's remember the happy song.
The one you played for? I
Yeah, we
wasn't
never
really
like-
listening to it.
Well, let's sing it. You ready? X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. What, you remember that?
No,
No,
is that
no
no
one
one
ever
ever
told
told
us
you?
that.
Let's see it.
Now, what the quadratic formula does, by using the quadratic formula, those a, b's, and c's, those are just the coefficients of the equation. What that does by using that formula is that it automatically is finding your zeros. It's finding the zeros for you. It's giving you your solutions. It's telling you where it crosses the x-axis. If it's real, imaginary, or equal to 0. We'll talk about what that means in a second. So, anytime you're using quadratic formula, x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all
Pop
over
goes the
2a.
lead.
Very good. Maybe, remember, your A is the coefficient of the x squared, B is part of the x, and C is left over. Can,
Are those the same?
they might be.
Like the formulas, are they both quadratic?
Quadratic is always a second degree polynomial.
Or is that just showing us where the A is?
Yeah.
Second degree first.
Okay. Now, the one part of the quadratic formula that you might not have ever heard about is something called the discriminant. You ever heard of that?
Yes. Yeah.
What is it?
Negative B over 2A.
What is it?
That's mean.
Negative B over 2A.
No.
It's kind of like, yeah, it's 2A
The
over
that
2A.
negative b is kind of like it's almost your axis of symmetry, but not. The discriminant is the b squared minus 4ac.
That's
What the discriminant does is that it allows you to find out what type of solutions you're going to have.
What's that?
Solutions?
Yeah, like what do you mean what type?
Well, think about it. B squared minus 4ac is underneath the square root, correct? If I have b squared minus 4ac and it's positive, I can take the square root of it, correct?
Oh
If b squared minus 4ac is negative, I'd get imaginary, right? If b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0, I'd have something plus or minus 0, so I would only have one answer. So what the discriminant tells you is that if b squared minus 4ac is positive, you have two real answers. If it's negative, you have two imaginary answers. And if it equals 0, you have one real answer. I just wanted you guys to be aware of what the discriminant does. You would be working with it anyway, and you would find out that you'd have imaginary numbers or real numbers, or it could be 0. But the discriminant allows you to go through a problem, or not even go through the entire problem, and just tell what type of solution you're going to get. Yes, sir?
With the negative, is that just plus or minus?
No, the negative is what the value of b squared minus 4ac is.
Like with the two answers just be plus or
No. Oh, yes. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, because you're having the opposite of b plus or minus the square root. Yes. Now I see what you're saying. It made sense. Sooner or later. Kinda. Of course.
Wow.
Oh, we don't even know how to do this.
Halloween.
Question on that. You're welcome.
We're not gonna like try. Oh.
Like our random.
These are all odds. I gave you guys all odd problems so you can check your answers.
You put the answers online.
Oh, that's right. I'll do that today. Okay? Yes, I'll do that. Jeez. Okay. The 287 is the section 5.5, and the 295 is section 5.6. The problems themselves I put online as well, as far in the homework part of the website, so they're there if you don't get them all copied down. Those are everything's an odd. You're doing all odds on all these problems. No, these are just all odds. Yeah, you can start with if you do every other, start with 47, and then also start on 49 as well. Hey, I had 22 minutes today. I used my 22 minutes. Actually, I only used 19 minutes, and I showed you guys 2 sections.
Yeah, we don't.